I'm going to tell you a little story about my mother, Justine Merritt. When I was growing up, when I was in high school, she was an anti-racist organizer, and she became a high school teacher serving a low-income black community. In 1975, when I was long gone from home, she went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and witnessed the horrors and felt the grief and the rage. And she felt that she had a low level of depression ever since the bombs were dropped in 1945. And an idea came to her late in 1982 when she was on a silent retreat. She felt called to wrap a string around her finger so that we could never forget. She wanted us to all wrap a string around a finger. So she wanted to wrap a symbol of war with a symbol of peace. And she wanted to wrap the Pentagon in a peace ribbon at the 40th anniversary of the bombings. She asked me, "What do you think about this? Do you think I'm crazy?" At that point, I had 3 children under the age of 5. Maura was an infant at the time. I was feeling kind of overwhelmed, and I thought, "No, I don't think you're crazy. It's going to be a big job, but yeah, go for it." So she started reaching out to all her friends and peace organizations, and her idea was to have everyone represent on a standard size piece of muslin, 18 by 36 inches, what they most cherish and would least like to see lost in a nuclear war. So this is the first one she did. It took her hundreds of hours. It's a poster of single-stitch embroidery with names of perhaps 200 of her beloveds. So she decided that she needed to get on the road. She took Trailways buses and moved from basement community centers to churches to peace centers. And she crisscrossed the country, basically. And she took this message wherever she went. They thought at first they might need 4,000 of the ribbons tied end to end to encircle the Pentagon. But it turned out that they gathered almost 30,000 of them. And if you look on the back of your chair, some of you have ribbons. If you pull them out, these are mostly works of art. And on the back or on the front, you can see who worked on these ribbons between 1982 and 1985 when they went to D.C. Before going to D.C., each state had a gathering of the ribbons, and these were incredible events in every state. The first time that we saw them all together was at the National Cathedral, where there were 5,000 of them, and it was the most beautiful celebration of peace. Hibakusha spoke, my mother spoke, the Howard University Gospel Choir sang, there were bagpipes, there was dance. It was a beautiful expression of a demand for peace. The next day, the ribbons were all taken out, and there were 15 miles tied end to end of the ribbon. They encircled not only the Pentagon, but also the Washington Monument and the Capitol. It was just a stunningly beautiful peace protest. It was tangible hope and a powerful message to our electeds and to the military-industrial complex that we do not want war. We will not have it. So what was conceived in grief and fear and rage had grown into this, what she called a lovely binding cloth to tie up our nation's wounds. It was a burst of color and power People, mostly women, were emboldened to speak their truth to power. And Justine asked, as we watch a child sleeping or our children playing, what would we not give of our time, of our creative gifts, of our treasure to save a single child and a vulnerable planet? She said, "You bring the peace," and she was right. At the same time, as reported by one of our Oregon physician members, Dr. Stan Friedman, who's a cardiologist, there was a huge effort going on behind the scenes. His mentor, Stan's mentor, Dr. Bernie Lown, who was the co-founder of Physicians for Social Responsibility, was working with Yevgeny Cheksov, who was also a cardiologist and the personal physician to Gorbachev. So together, they conspired to bring the two men together, and as a result of that, in 1987, there was a new treaty on intermediate weapon use from Europe. So this is just to say that there are many ways to bring the peace, and we'll each find our own way, but we know that we must prevent what we cannot cure.
At this time, we would like to present our keynote speaker, Michiko Kornhauser. Michiko's personal story of living through the United States' use of nuclear weapons is harrowing and powerful. The U.S. is still the only country to have used nuclear bombs in war. Let us also remember that there are other forms of radioactive weapons that have been used on multiple battlefields. Depleted uranium shells, which act like slow-motion Hiroshimas, are scattered in Iraq, Afghanistan, former Yugoslavia, and elsewhere. The ever-present danger of nuclear power plants causing widespread and irreparable damage was made clear with the Fukushima accident in 2011. Michiko is a living reminder to oppose nuclear madness. As Hibakusha, a survivor of the 1945 blast, we are honored to have her share her story with us once again. Please join me in welcoming Michiko Kornhauser.
I wish nothing but peace in the world for our children and grandchildren and so on. So whenever I have a chance, I go to schools and colleges and give talk, wishing these children will grow up and see the peace in the world. This is about World War II through the eyes of a Japanese girl. In the fall of 1941, my family and I came back from Taiwan, where my father, as a Japanese Imperial Navy officer, was to establish a Navy base in southern Taiwan called Takao. After our return, we began to live in the city of Kamakura, located in the south of Tokyo. One day, when I was playing with my toys, I suddenly heard my father shout, "Oh no, the emperor is wrong to start a war against America. We simply do not have enough natural resources to fight against America." My mother was frantically trying to calm my father down. She was afraid that our neighbors would report my father to the military police and will have my father arrested and thrown into jail. My father shook his head and mumbled, "We will not win this war." It was the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941. The Japanese Navy supply system in Japan became divided into two as the war started, East and West, and my father became the head of the Western Division, and its headquarters was situated in Okayama City, about 100 miles east of Hiroshima, where I grew up until I came to the East-West Center in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1961, thanks to President Kennedy. Then one day, my father was sent to New Guinea to oversee the smooth distribution of the Navy supplies in the entire Pacific. As the days and months went by, we began to hear more and more pessimistic news on how the war was turning into. Then one day, we heard from the Japanese government that my father was missing in action in New Guinea and presumed killed. It was May the 3rd, 1944. I couldn't believe the news that I would never see my father again. The next day, when I came home from school, my mother was crying and told me that one Navy officer came into my father's office and knelt down in front of the door and shot himself to death. He had a piece of paper in his hand which said that without Captain Usui, Japan was no longer worthwhile a place to live. Everybody felt sad and moved around quietly. The war situation was getting worse for Japan, and one night, many B-29 bombers flew over Okayama City where I was living and dropped the firebombs, destroying much of the eastern part of the city. That night, I lost more than 20% of my classmates. Soon, the school teachers gathered us children and took us to the countryside to be safe. We began to live in a large temple together. One day on August the 8th, when we were playing outside, we suddenly noticed the sky was getting dark. And soon, we became covered with dark and gray ash. The teachers listened to the radio and told us that America had dropped a huge bomb over Hiroshima, which started a huge fire. As the wind was blowing our way, we got the ash. After all, we were only 100 miles away from Hiroshima. The teachers urged us, please run to Yoshi River and wash yourself. As we rushed to the river nearby, we noticed that the river was covered with the same ash too. But we did our best to clean ourselves as the teachers urged us. Now we know everything was radioactive, but that day we didn't know anything about it. Soon after that, on August the 15th, we heard the emperor announce that the war was over and we were allowed to go home. As I arrived home, I saw my neighbor's son in the living room. My mother told me that both his parents were visiting their relatives in Hiroshima when the atomic bomb was dropped, and there was no communication from them ever since. So their only son went to Hiroshima to look for his parents and found that the house they were visiting was destroyed and both parents were killed. After he buried his parents in the gravesite, he came home. Now that he was all by himself, my mother asked him to come and live with us. When September came, our school started. This boy, however, had no energy to get up from his bed. One day, when I came home from school, my mother told me that the boy was diagnosed to have radiation sickness from having been to Hiroshima so soon after the bomb was dropped. Sometime after that fall of 1945, that boy died, joined the parents. Throughout my life, I always wondered about ourselves who were covered with the ash, black ash, from Hiroshima that day. So I began to live one day at a time. Thank you very much for listening to me. But here, I'd like to tell you what happened. That is, when the atomic bomb was dropped on August the 6th to Hiroshima, instantly killed 80,000 people. However, 70,000, 135,000 more suffered for years with a lingering radiation sickness. In the case of Nagasaki, the atomic bomb called Catman was dropped 3 days later and killed 40,000 people at once. But 60,000 to 80,000 people suffered for years with a lingering radiation sickness. Today, 2024, 79 years later, have we learned anything from the past? We want nothing but peace in the world so we can live together happily ever after. Now we are going to have singers singing, hoping that we will have peace in the world.
Our next performer is educator, poet, lyricist, and youth organizer, Ty.Brack. Ty takes a more raw, contemporary approach to the madness of nuclear proliferation. Please welcome Ty.Brack.
In response to the bomb, Oppenheimer, the film, and the shared experience that U.S. imperialism attempts to take from us every day. I guess I'm over all the superheroes. I guess I'm over the multiverses. It could all be so simple. We got all these MCUs and DCUs and MonsterVerses, and those are all just distractions from the non-fiction multiverses created by men of war turned into superheroes, using their power to mutate timelines just to solidify their own main character energy, like that one so-called superhero who created the atomic bomb just to prove he could. That bomb that killed millions, created cancers and genetic mutations, that bomb that opened millions of spaghetti verses, stretched thin to the whims of future heroic egos, each verse ready to snap like humanity's inflamed connective tissues. Snap goes generations of health in an atomic plague. Snap goes 80 years of peace as the world races to create their own bombs just in case the so-called superhero's bomb drops again. Snap goes an entire culture's anti-war allegories bought with stolen money to maintain the myths of the so-called superhero. Snap goes justice with every passing day. The so-called superhero refuses reparations to victims of his bomb. Snap goes credibility of the so-called superhero's followers, exposed to radiation while creating his bomb, passing on generations of mutations, yet still worshiping the so-called superhero's box office appeal. I mean, these are the multiverses we all live in. I mean, we know that so-called superhero gets his movie while we get to live out every possible snap. I mean, it could all be so simple. Thank you.
And I'd like to bring Portland Taiko back to the stage to close out our evening. Thank you very much for attending tonight's Remembrance Ceremony.